Biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are ranked as one of the top 5 threats humanity will face in the next 10 years. Human population growth, increasing consumption, and a poor resource efficiency mainly lead to an overexploitation of the nature and the extinction of flora and fauna, rising levels of greenhouse gases, and to the disruption of entire ecosystems. Dysfunctional ecosystems provoke increasingly large and regular natural disasters, be it extreme heat, drought, floods, insect plagues, or many others. Even the current COVID-19 pandemic is possibly triggered by human disturbance of the nature. These disasters have a direct impact on our lives and livelihoods. They destroy the basis of our economic potential, as the loss of diversity causes the loss of nearly 50% of the world GDP. Biodiversity is therefore a geopolitical resource, and it's more likely that the future leading economies are those that can succeed in conserving their biodiversity and in creating sustainable business models.
Good afternoon to everybody. We're just waiting on Raymond, who is the moderator, to connect. Hopefully that happens very soon. So basically what's going to happen from our end, as soon as it's 2 p.m., we have a very, very short, about 1 minute video that basically is going to sort of frame the conversation that we will play, and then the panel will be immediately into the hands of Raymond, who will steer the conversation until maximum 3:30. Hopefully by 3:15 we will already have finished the conversation. Yes, please let me know if you have any questions or comments or suggestions at this point.
Hello.
Yes, hi Juliet.
Hi, I was just testing to see if you could hear me. Are we supposed to leave our videos on through the discussions?
Yes, we would prefer it because we would like to record this and then put it on the website. So we would, if your internet can allow, we would kindly request that you keep your videos on. And that's only for the speakers. Everybody else who joins does not have to have their video on, so that we can just record the speakers and the moderator with the video.
Hello. Just trying to find out if it can it be seen live on Facebook or?
Yes, that's actually going to happen. That's what's going to happen. It's also going to be live on Facebook.
And possibly the link for others.
Can I share the link here?
You can share the link here for others who'd like to watch, please.
Okay, so give it a second. I'm going to share the link as soon as we go live, so that you can circulate it. Because from our admin end, how it's set up is for it to go live on Facebook. If I do the live on Facebook now, it's automatically going to be live, and we would, just prefer to have that set up when the panel is already ongoing.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, so I just talked to Raymond. He is, oh, here he is actually. Okay, so Raymond is on as well. That means all the panelists are on. Thank you so much for connecting. We'll be starting in about just a minute, just to just the housekeeping rules. Again, we're going to just start with a very short video. It's about 1 minute, and then Raymond will take the conversation from there. We would also like to request that if you're able, you keep your videos on, as we will be recording this session and putting it on our website. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you so much for having me. So yeah, you delayed a little bit.
Good afternoon, Juliet and everyone. Just to confirm that my mic is working.
Good afternoon,
Lily. Yes, we can hear you.
All right, it is officially 2 p.m. I would like to kick this off.
Thank you.
Just allow me to share my screen so that I can show you the video, and then Raymond, it will be over to you.
Biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are ranked as one of the top 5 threats humanity will face in the next. Biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse are ranked as one of the top 5 threats humanity will face in the next 10 years. Human population growth, increasing consumption, and a poor resource efficiency mainly lead to an overexploitation of the nature and the extinction of flora and fauna, rising levels of greenhouse gases, and to the disruption of entire ecosystems. Dysfunctional ecosystems provoke increasingly large and regular natural disasters, be it extreme heat, drought, floods, insect plagues, or many others. Even the current COVID-19 pandemic is possibly triggered by human disturbance of the nature. These disasters have a direct impact on our lives and livelihoods. They destroy the basis of our economic potential, as the loss of diversity causes the loss of nearly 50% of the world GDP. Biodiversity is therefore a geopolitical resource, and it's more likely that the future leading economies are those that can succeed in conserving their biodiversity and in creating sustainable business models.
Over to you, Raymond.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and welcome, of course, to our discussion today on biodiversity. I just want to take a round of introductions so that our audience can get to know who we have on the panel. So I'll start with Juliet, if you can unmute your microphone and introduce yourself, and then we move from there.
Hello to all of you. My name is Juliet Abaliwano. I work with the French Development Agency here in Uganda as a program officer for water and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. Hilda, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Hi, everyone. My name is Hilda Flavia Nakawie. I'm a climate activist, and I'm glad to be here. I'm also the founder, Fridays for Future, here in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Walter, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Walter Odokorwot. I work for Uganda Wildlife Authority, but currently I'm out for my study and working now to support conservation through public health, where I work as a coordinator for human-wildlife conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We also have Lily Ajarova, if you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Raymond and everyone. Lily Ajarova is my name. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Uganda Tourism Board. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We also have very finally Ojok Okello, if you could introduce yourself also.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Ojok Okello, and I'm a program officer at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, but I'm also involved in community conservation and regeneration of share trees right out of Otuke district in northern Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ojok, for that introduction. Now that all the panelists are comfortable with themselves and we know who we're talking to, I just wanted to start the conversation. And I think that I'd want to start with Hilda, because you're the activist in this space. And I just want to first ask you, we just watched a brief video, which basically suggests that if we don't get serious about our conservation efforts, we will be in big trouble as a country, but also as a globe. Why is it important for us to have a conversation on conservation?
Well, thank you, Raymond. I hope I am clear. Well, the video we've just seen tells us that in 10 years from now, we will have humanity, we will be facing a very big system collapse. But I just wanted to highlight that we are already facing this ecosystem collapse, and it's here. In 10 years from now, it will be at the peak. Someone might think that in 10 years it will be starting, but no, in 10 years it will be at the peak, and by that time we will have nothing to do about it. But right now we still have a chance to do something about it. Biodiversity is very, very critical because it's the source of our living, it's the source of our livelihoods. Humans cannot survive without nature. Animals cannot survive without nature. And that's why even in the Bible, it's very clear. Humans were created last. Nature was created before humans. That means nature can survive alone, but we humans cannot survive without nature. And that is why it's very crucial that as human beings conserve or preserve biodiversity. Yes.
Julie, I know that the French Development Agency is doing something with regards to conservation efforts. What was the problem when you came in, and how are those conservation efforts currently going for you?
Thank you for that question, moderator. The French Development Agency has been working, as you know, in many sectors, and many of them infrastructure sectors, such as water, energy, urban development. And therefore, you see that these sectors are very crucial in terms of meeting the environment biodiversity in order to be sustainable. So if we're investing in water, we need the protection of the biodiversity. If we're investing in energy, the same thing, because we're relying on water, sometimes renewable energy. Urban development, as Hilda has mentioned, the livelihood of people. So the fact that we're investing in infrastructure and in development projects leads us to have a need to invest in biodiversity protection in order to maintain the sustainability of our projects. So AFD has raised the priority of biodiversity over the years to ensure that the if we are investing in projects, one of the main things we look at is to avoid, minimize, restore, or offset in case we have development projects in sensitive critical areas. And the best is, of course, to avoid. So we have tools that enable us to avoid destruction of the biodiversity, causing a no-net loss or a net gain in biodiversity in any of the projects that we actually support. So it is because of this background of sustainability that AFD is investing in the protection and conservation of nature and biodiversity.
All right, thank you so much. I now want to move to Lily Ajarova, and I know that for you this is a lifeline. This conversation is basically the lifeline because all tourism largely depends on how well we conserve what's available at the moment. As the Uganda Tourism Board, what are you doing about biodiversity? What are you doing about conservation efforts?
Thank you very much, Raymond, and everyone. First, I would like to start by saying thank you to the organizers of this conference, the French Embassy and all the others. I know there's more than the French Embassy. I'm mentioning French Embassy because I got my invitation through them, but I know there are more partners. Thank you all very much for putting this together, and specifically as well for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I really thank you for that. To the point on the subject of discussion, biodiversity as a sustainable competitive advantage, very key to note is that biodiversity contributes significantly to the attractiveness and the quality of a destination. We are talking of Uganda as a tourist destination. So biodiversity contribution to Uganda's tourism as a destination is at the heart of it. Biodiversity is a tourism asset. So Uganda as well, we mark a destination Uganda as an ecotourism destination, which means that most of our assets are nature-based. So most of our attractions that we are selling are nature-based experiences, outdoor experiences, research experiences that are centered around the biodiversity. Now, as I mentioned about Uganda being an ecotourism destination, that's how we sell it, sustainable destination. There are key principles, 4 key principles under this. One, an effective sustainability planning and management of the destination or of the businesses in the tourism sector. 2, maximizing on the social and economic benefits to the local community. 3, enhancing cultural heritage. 4, minimizing the negative impact on the natural environment. Just to point out how tourism is supporting conservation. 1, if we take the case that we have in Uganda, where most of the tourist destinations in Uganda currently are majorly to the protected areas, the national parks, basically. And to this, we know very well that most of the income, the biggest percentage of the income that UA receives to manage its protected areas is derived from the tourism income. 2, as we have the tourists, both domestic, region and international tourists coming into the country, tourism is helping to raise awareness about conservation in this country, because some of these tourists go to specific conservation projects. Besides that, the tourists themselves as well get to contribute to those conservation projects. I know we have a giraffe project, we have different projects that is being run by Uganda Wildlife Authority, And as the tourists come, as they are made aware, they also make direct contribution to conservation through those projects, besides paying entrance fees and other tourism services fees that they have to pay for. Next, we also have sustainable tourism practices that are helping with supporting conservation. This is from the point of view that one, as Uganda Wildlife Authority developed tourism in their protected areas, there are strict guidelines that have been set up. We are all very aware that our prime tourism product is the great ape product, specifically the mountain gorillas. And we are all very aware that UA has very strict regulations on the tourists who get to view the gorillas. The numbers are restricted. The distance that the tourists have to keep to the animals are restricted, and all other protocols that go with it in terms of health, safety for the animals, but also for the staff and everyone involved in the tourism of mountain gorillas. So that is one way. And two, as Uganda Tourism Board, we are the mandated government agency that is supposed to regulate the tourism sector in Uganda. How are we doing this? We are supposed to register, license, inspect, and license every tourism operation in this country, whether it is accommodation, whether it is a cultural site, whatever destination or experience that is being offered. So with that, we are trying to improve on our system. We are currently undergoing review and trying to digitize this process of licensing the operators, registering, inspecting, and licensing them. In doing this, how we help in a sustainable operation of the tourism services is, one, we have developed minimum standards for each tourism operating subsector, whether it's accommodation, whether it is tour operations, travel agencies, or the destination management themselves. There are minimum standards. In these minimum standards, there are some of the things that are very critical that contributes to conservation that we consider. One, how is your waste management? If you have a hospitality facility, how are you managing your waste? Two, the supply chain. Yeah, are you actually buying from the tourism value chain suppliers? Use of natural resources in construction for those who have facilities. So these are some of the ways in which we are contributing. Tourism is contributing to conservation of biodiversity. I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are really broad, and I'm going to come back to you later and ask you possibly about the challenges that you're facing as the tourism board in that regard. But I want to bring Walter into the conversation. Walter, what are your own thoughts about the biodiversity and conservation efforts that we have currently?
Right, thank you very much, the team, everyone here. I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. It's a nice and interesting topic to discuss. When we look at biodiversity, it is something so broad that we need to work on. The threat is continuing, and it's high time that we really need to move in. We cannot stop it. This threat is continuous, and the only way is to rush and look at how to mitigate. That is by turning some of these threats into an opportunity to the livelihood of the local communities that are highly affected by the damage caused by the biodiversity loss. So the 10 years we are speaking of is there, but it's not too late. that we need to move into. I first like to introduce the organization I work for, that is Conservation Through Public Health, which is working so closely with Uganda Wildlife Authority, especially in gorilla conservation in the areas around Bwindi, Mugahinga, to ensure that gorilla interaction with the human population is handled in an amicable way. This is not only gorilla, include other apes. So we are working to ensure that disease transmission between communities and the wildlife and the biodiversity as a whole is minimized. So by regularly monitoring blood sample from human, from gorillas, and the domestic livestock, including livestock. So that's one way we are doing. Also to look at how community can participate in conserving biodiversity is by improving their economic welfare. That is, we buy coffee from the farmers around the park, around the Bwindi, Mugahinga, at a high price. And this coffee is processed and exported and given to consumers at quite impressive value. This is another way that we feel that when the community and people are earning alternative source of revenue from conservation, they should be able to protect. We're also doing tree planting so that we minimize damage to environment. Tree planting, giving seedlings to the local communities, giving seedlings to farmers who can afford to plant who have space. This is another way that through this we can be able to improve on the biodiversity loss. And village health team, we believe that once people are healthy, the wildlife is healthy, and the domestic animals are also healthy, there will be need and love for people to conserve. And that's on how we can reduce biodiversity loss. This is part of the activities that we are doing, but the key important aspect is promoting community participation in biodiversity management. That is the key function that we are looking into. And at the moment, we are working with ex-poachers in Bwindi, around Bwindi, Mugahinga, to drive away gorillas that would be moving outside the protected areas, maybe that can face threats. You are all aware that recently we lost a gorilla, an adult gorilla, which was very unfortunately, but the factor still led to lack of economic development in the communities. So we are trying to look at how to motivate them. So we are working with the ex-poachers, facilitating them so that they don't get back to the protected area to destroy wildlife and also outside. We are now expanding to ensure that biodiversity conservation is not only linked to protected area. This is the challenge that we have in Uganda at the moment. Many people perceive and understand biodiversity in terms of wildlife conservation and protected area, which I think it is completely wrong. We need to see how we can expand. There are a lot of pockets of wildlife habitat outside, which is never protected. But traditionally, we are being protected by landowners, by the chief, by kings, and all these approaches really gone down. And we need to see how do we reverse it, how do we get it back? And that's why CTPH at the moment has expanded its activity to include Karamoja, Makshon Falls, Lake Mburo, to see that biodiversity conservation, especially human-wildlife conflict, which is expanding due to change in land use, which is coming up as a result of nature, destruction to nature and change in the environment, is becoming a threat to survival of wildlife outside protected areas. So we need community landowners to participate into that and stop wildlife, human-wildlife conflict, and also address poaching. Wildlife do not know the boundary. People believe that wildlife is supposed to be in the park, in the protected area, which is wrong. The habitat cuts across, so it's the responsibility of everyone to work around to see that this is put in line and biodiversity protected. This is what CTPS is doing. I can stop here for now. Thank you.
Walter, I'm going to bring in Ojok, but I wanted to ask you before you could go away.
Please.
In terms of working with exporters to enhance biodiversity, one of the key problems in conservation is that the the interests, human interests and wildlife interests occasionally meet in communities where the wildlife settles. Just how long does it take for the communities to understand their role in conserving the environment, but also their role in protecting the wildlife around them?
Yeah, thank you. This is a quite a complicated situation. You know, community can understand over a period of time, but the world or this economic situation is dynamic. Poverty is hitting people badly, especially when we talk of communities outside protected areas. They react negatively to biodiversity basing on their livelihood, basing on their economic needs. So we need to talk continuously as situation changes. But we can't say that over a period of time, this talking is over. We need to make people understand, to talk much more, to make people understand the benefit that can be derived from conservation of biodiversity. And if community participate and understand this benefit, then there will be some need to reduce the talking. So if they understand and earn revenue from the biodiversity on their land, we believe that in the long term they can change land use. And even instead of going to dig all the time, one can go for conservation, creating what we call now game ranching. When you look in Uganda at the moment, many people really fail to understand what the provision in the law. Our law currently provide for people to use land, their land for game ranching. So we need to see how we can convert. Digging, we have seen unreliable rainfall coming in, extreme drought, sometimes floods. So we can't depend on agricultural activities. So we need to move and look into biodiversity conservation as an alternative livelihood to the local communities. This should be our focus of how we should move. In many countries, this had already been done in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Southern Africa, where we could hear about conservancy taking place, where the landowners put their land into conservation purposes, and they get revenue through tourism, some get through sport hunting, which is much more lucrative than unpredictable agricultural activities. So the talking should continue until we achieve, people see the benefit of biodiversity conservation, then they can appreciate to coexist with it.
All right, thank you so much, Walter. I just want to now pick Ojok's mind also on what he thinks about the conversation on biodiversity and conservation. Do we have Ojok? I see him on video. Okay, as we circle back to Ojok and get clear audio from him, I want to come back to Lily Ajarova now. The question that I'd wanted to ask you at the start was, what are the challenges that you're facing as a tourism board with regards to conservation efforts? You bring in millions of tourists in the country every year, and that's like a starting point to teach people on conservation, teach people on biodiversity, but also you use the spaces that the wildlife works in. You use spaces where the flora and fauna is. What challenges are you facing?
Thank you very much, Raymond. I would like to respond to this way beyond just Uganda Tourism Board, but maybe overall as the tourism sector, but generally as well, but very specific to the tourism sector. First, in relation to the theme of this conference, we have got to appreciate that tourism is a very, very valuable strategy or a very valuable development that contributes to biodiversity conservation. Why am I saying this? Because we have the statistics very clearly that shows in 2018-2019, tourism contributed 7.7% to the GDP of Uganda. Tourism was the #1 foreign exchange earner with US dollars 1.6 billion earnings. The employment, close to 700,000 Ugandans are employed in the tourism sector, were employed in the tourism sector, direct employment, not the indirect employment. So these are some of the significant contribution that tourism is making. And the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us the value that tourism plays. From the point of view that we have lost all the business, the 7.7% GDP contribution is not going to be there for this calendar year. We have, from the survey we have done, and we are still continuing to do more surveys to get the impact of the pandemic on the tourism sector in Uganda. To this point, 74% of Ugandans who are directly employed in the tourism sector are now jobless. And in terms of the earnings, the businesses that have been cancelled so far has been registered up to 574 million US dollars. These were already bookings that were already confirmed and cancelled, and it does not take into consideration other bookings that normally come last minute or within short term. So what else have we experienced? Because we have a number of communities, local communities, who are directly involved in tourism around the protected areas, but also in different places outside the protected areas, offering cultural experiences and other adventurous experiences. All these people have been, most of them have been left jobless. They have closed down their businesses. And what has this done to biodiversity, especially for those who are around the protected areas? They have now had to turn to the protected areas to get whatever resource they can get for their livelihoods, including the poaching level having gone higher, deforestation during this period, because people need the basic resources for their livelihood. So these are some of the key challenges that we are having, but also very specific to the tourism development and growth in Uganda. Some of the challenges we have, and maybe even very specific to Uganda Tourism Board, is that one, our level of marketing needs to improve if we really have to position Uganda as the preferred destination in the world. Our branding needs to improve. The level of investment that we make to promote the destination has to be upped up. Two, professionalizing the industry. Yeah, I already mentioned a number of the players in the industry are local communities, but the level of professional in doing their businesses is lacking. So there's need to professionalize the sector if we are to provide the best service to match with what our target is in positioning the destination as the preferred destination in the world. We also have a challenge that to this point, there has been a lot of concentration on marketing the mountain gorillas, the protected area services, which is basically wildlife viewing, the safaris, tracking of the chimpanzees, the gorillas, viewing elephants, you know, doing the boat ride in Mercian Falls, Lake Mboro, and Queen Elizabeth. There's need for us to diversify our tourism offerings. There's so much assets that we have way beyond the protected areas that we can develop to improve on our tourism. The cultural asset that this country has could be of higher value than what we even have with wildlife, which we haven't really developed to provide this as a clear offering that tourists come specifically to experience the culture of Uganda. Right now, it's just in little bits, you know, as a secondary offering to wildlife being our major offering. Beyond that, there's so many other assets we have to develop for adventure tourism, which we haven't really developed. So we have a lot that we can develop to grow the tourism sector, but there are some of these challenges that we still face to be able to grow the tourism. The more that tourism grows, the more that we can be able to contribute to the biodiversity of this country as well. More especially the fragile ecosystem that we have. And of course, as I mentioned in my opening statement, that the health of the biodiversity of a country determines the quality and the competitiveness of the destination.
All right.
I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. Hilda, let me just bring you back into the conversation now. As an activist, what do you feel is not going right in the conservation space for Uganda? What do you feel is lacking in the biodiversity fight for Uganda?
Thank you so much, Raymond, for that question. As an activist, I feel that we are not doing enough as a country and as a continent, Africa. Like I said earlier, our lives depend on nature. If we do not conserve nature, then we won't have lives or livelihoods. What I think is there's a lot of talk going on instead of action. If, for example, the pandemic has shown us that we can do a lot more than talk to action, because if we had a lot more talk on biodiversity conservation, it would have raised the information, it would have spread the information even to the list of people. For example, people in rural areas, they would be knowing about conservation and what they have to do or what role they have to play. But there's not enough talk going on about biodiversity conservation. This should be on front pages on newspapers. It should be on televisions, on radios every time. It should be the talk of the day, just like we see politics and all these other talks that are given every day, for example, entertainment. And right now, humanity's greatest challenge or threat is the belief that real action on biodiversity conservation or on climate change is being taken when we think that other people are doing much more that has to be done. We forget our roles in playing part. So we have to realize that there is not so much action that is taken in regards to conservation or in regards to ecosystem restoration. And that is why we need to come in, all of us, regardless of the role you play in the community. We have to come together and see this through. We have to act. For example, we are on the verge of a mass extinction, and in 10 years, we will be at the tipping point we will be at a point of no return. We see that wildlife has declined on average about 50% in the last, on average 60% in the last 50 years. years. And this is a very big percentage for us. We cannot look on when all this is going on. That's why we activists are coming out to spread awareness, to create awareness about things that matter. This should be the talk in youths for now, because our biggest percentage in the country is made up of youth, and we have the biggest role to play. We have a lot of our future ahead of us. Therefore, we need to do much more than other people are doing. And we also see that the ongoing corona is a direct consequence of our broken relationship with nature. And scientists have for decades warned about the horrific things or effects that can come out of this consequence. For example, droughts, diseases, famine. But then why do we still have to pay a deaf ear? This is our responsibility. We have to create awareness, or we have to carry out action in whatever thing we do. We have to walk the talk. Yes, thank you, Raymond.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's powerful in terms of like walking the talk, and already Walt already gave us like a good example of how the talk can be walked. We have finally Ojok, we have him now. Ojok, just give us your thoughts on conservation and biodiversity, but more intently now, because Hilda's been talking about walking the talk. What role can communities play in biodiversity and conservation?
Thank you very much, Hilda. And just to add on Hilda's submission about global health challenges and pandemics and how coronavirus is a result.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I think it's out. Okay.
Okay. Sorry
I think
about
this
that,
is
but
just...
I think that you should protect the score moving forward. Okay. But you are still talking about Hilda's point on how we can.
Yeah. So I was emphasizing that biodiversity also offers the solution. You would want to know that most of the drugs we use, the medicines, are derived, or we get them from the natural resources, from mostly the trees. So I think this is just an advantage for us, and a recall for us to take action to protect this. And the funny thing is that most of these biodiversity resources that offers the solution are on the verge of collapse and extinction. Again, underscoring the critical significance that we should always take if we want to protect this. But also, biodiversity is an economic and livelihood option. And I think this point has already been reiterated and emphasized severally. At the bottom line of all this, I think, is taking community conservation efforts to the next level, because we know that the people who are closest to natural resources or to nature are the ones who actually destroy them. And most of the time, it is because they do not understand in detail and in depth why these natural resources exist. I can give you an example, for instance, about the share trees, which is an action I have taken to kind of promote its regeneration and fight its destruction. Is that the people in my community, while they know that this tree is important, there is a gap, there is a big breakaway of what they know about this natural resource and its global significance. For instance, they process this natural resource and eat it at home. They do not know that if launched and properly marketed in the global marketplace, it is worth billions upon billions of shillings. So I think that in order to promote community conservation, we need to sensitize our communities and let them understand more broadly and deeply about why this natural resource is important beyond the ecosystem or beyond the surrounding in which they exist. But also, we should, as much as possible, enhance community participation. Because if we do not do this, they will continue in its destructive trend. Why? Because as I emphasized earlier, they are the ones who live in the closest proximity to these natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ojok, for that. And now, if anyone has questions, I think you put your hand, you can either raise your hand, if you use the raise hand option, I'll see you, but you can also type in the chat box your question, I'll be able to get to it. But I wanted to offer a sense of direction so that, because we're coming to a close of this, and I want to start with Juliet in terms of like moving forward. What can be done more immediately in the space of sustainability to offer what you'd call a competitive advantage for countries that protect their flora and fauna, for countries that are
Hello, sorry, can you come again, Raymond?
I was just asking, in terms of like offering direction now, because we're in the final part of our webinar, what can be done to offer a competitive advantage? What kind of competitive advantages will the people that protect the biodiversity in their areas, the people that have conservation efforts, what kind of competitive advantages does that give them over others?
I think going forward, many of us have talked about walking the talk and what needs to be done, especially by the population. But I think a lot needs to be done by the government as well, in terms of setting policies in place in order to enhance biodiversity conservation. We've seen some research done on payment for ecosystems and from those who are utilizing the biodiversity. So we have people like hydropower investors or maybe water users or cement factories or breweries who are actually making use of this resource of biodiversity, actually paying or contributing to its conservation. And I think this needs to be emphasized more in terms of bringing it more into law and enforced, not really enforced, but bringing it into the law so that we can actually move forward in protecting the biodiversity. And the communities gain because they are able to receive some of these, the contributions that come in from the private sector and from those who are utilizing the resource, and helping them to be more, let me say, helping them to use the resource better in terms of farming methods or investing in agriculture, in things like beekeeping. And so we need to see a complete cycle in terms of the government, the private sector, and the communities. And these communities, because then are changing their way of life and gaining more in terms of financial gains from protecting this resource, then they will be able to actually protect the resource even more. So what we're seeing is the community is lacking in knowledge, first of all, in terms of what can be done using the biodiversity, using the resources that they have at hand, and they're languishing in poverty. So the link between poverty and biodiversity degradation is very close. So and also lack of knowledge. So building the capacity of the local communities, this can also be done by government. This can be done by the curriculum. This can be done by the private sector, those who are investing in the area, to enable them to actually know that they can make a useful tool out of the resource to improve their livelihoods. And the government also needs to come in strongly in terms of ensuring that the policies are in place, like payment for ecosystems and other incentives. Those who are saying that they're helping poachers get out of poaching and doing something else to earn a livelihood. I think if we fail to meet that objective of poverty and reducing poverty or giving an alternative livelihood, we will fail to protect the biodiversity. because there's no way people will starve if they have a resource near them, and they'll cut the trees, they'll use the plants, they'll use the land, they'll change the land use if we do not give them an alternative. But if they are promoted to do tourism trails or other things, baskets from the bamboos for using the wetlands, beekeeping from the forests, and other areas, I think we have a way forward, but it needs to be a complete cycle, as well as the development partners. And that is what we are doing partly in terms of investing in infrastructure, but at the same time investing in biodiversity protection and using the communities to come up with these ideas so that they can know why and link the destruction of biodiversity to the problems that they have at hand. One clear example is water. We have investments in the water projects, but people are willing to settle in wetlands which protect the water, and then they're going to pay more because the water is contaminated and polluted, and then they have diseases because of this polluted water. So it comes back into the economy in terms of financing, again, now to clean this water out. So we need to understand the link biodiversity has with the resources that we have. I think that is what I would say going forward. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Julie. Donas has indicated he wanted to add to that. So Donas, you have the floor for about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and then you can go to
actually one. Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I think there is also a lot of need for more research and development because of the diversity of biodiversity. There is a lot we do not know about many of these natural resources, what they can do and why we need to do them. So there is a lot of need for research, and this is both lab scientific research, but also social science research and political economy analysis research, so that a lot of information can be gathered to kind of guide policy decision making and all these things. But I also think that for the economic potentials of most of our biodiversity to be tapped as a competitive advantage is also the need to add value to some of these. And again, from an example of a campaign and the kind of work that I do in Otuge, for instance, we've seen that people's interest to conserve and protect, but also to restore the share nuts, it's because they know that they have a product that has been added value to. It's not a traditional local product that they had. They now know that, oh, our shea butter could actually be done much better than we've always done it. And so this kind of reinvigorates their enthusiasm and interest to continue being part of the conservation of and regeneration. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jonas, for those thoughts. I wanted to bring in Walter now. Julie had mentioned earlier that one of the things that could be explored could be giving incentives for communities like yours, where biodiversity is being taken a little bit more serious. Maybe just to speak on that, but also tell us what kind of incentives would work for a community like that to enhance conservation.
Thank you very much. Maybe before I answer that, we needed to see, we have been talking about walk the talk and all this kind of thing. To me, I believe that awareness has been created enough since immemorial, but we need to put in action. Where we are talking, just like one going to the church and he sits, he listens to preaching, then he goes out, whether he takes it or not. But now we need to see that if you have been from the church, how do you reduce crime or behave like a good Christian or a good Muslim? That is where we need to see that community begin to participate in biodiversity conservation. So we appeal upon, the key thing is now there are a number of conservation NGOs operating in Uganda, and you find that they're working in an uncoordinated manner, which is not linking us to community participation. We need to look at giving hooks to the communities to go and fish instead of giving them fish. At the end, if you evaluate much of the activities that some of these conservation NGOs are providing are all linked to livelihood, but does not reflect on the well-being of the biodiversity. However, there are a number of benefits that are being given when we look into, like Uganda Wildlife Authority is providing 20% of the park entry fee to the community through revenue sharing. It supports community program, school construction, and all this. There's also a lot of money being got from sport hunting. That normally goes for community livelihood. But at the end, if we ask ourselves, what is the effect on wildlife conservation? As this motivation change the attitudes of people, that is what we need to look. If not, how do we change? And I think the best answer for this is when we now begin thinking in terms of conservancy, which I talked about before. Conservancy is basically the association of the different landowners of how they can put their land into conservation, benefit from it, create some business instead of government doing it, instead of NGOs doing it for them. So the aim of the conservancy looks at building strong, well-governing body, and we believe that if community have their own structure, well-governing body to handle, to address biodiversity loss, or to look at how to get benefit from biodiversity, they will be sustainable other than us going to do for them. So we need to look at how we can move into. And the responsibility of conservation, biodiversity conservation, we need to decentralize it to the communities. Approach of top-down is one of the factors that has led us to highly lose our biodiversity in Uganda, because the bottom-up has failed to take off for quite a while. If you compare to other countries, you find still we are clinging much more into this. We need to change the approach, just that the community originate the ideas. Community looks at how to get benefit from the biodiversity on their land, then they will be motivated to create change or to protect. But talking, telling them, that is just a sing-a-song. So we are lucky that the law of Uganda, the Wildlife Act, has this provision using wildlife use right, which is provided for different classes, up to 8 classes, including hunting, class A for hunting, class B for farming, class C for ranching, which is the conservancy. All those are provided for until class H for tourism. We need to see how do we get this one get implemented. I love to hear that there's one lady advocacy here. This is what we need to get in. The government has done enough. Uganda Wildlife Authority has done enough. But the aspect is now the implementation that we need to have it on the ground. So conservancy, if we put it, it will create a representative decision-making institution among the landowners, among the people who live with biodiversity. And if they can decide destruction like charcoal burning in a manner that is not controlled will be avoided. Poaching in large scale will be avoided, because people will be able to arrest poachers by themselves, not police. They don't need rangers to be in their areas. They also maintain it of culture. Culture, we all know the Rodi, the chief, the king, or even in Buganda, people have totem, and those animals were respected. But now the way these things are getting eroded, because people are not participating in respond to that kind of thing. If community are organized, I believe we are going to have a lot of conservation NGOs that are going to support people, that are going to support community directly to protect wildlife and the biodiversity in totality. So decentralization and community participation is the prime thing that we need to look and focus on within these 10 years that we are facing threat from biodiversity loss. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you so much, Walter. Lily, I wanted to bring you back in, but now more intently, when we talk about conservation and biodiversity, we most often forget that we are a young and developing country, and we have some of the development needs in a way affect biodiversity efforts. For example, hydropower plants in Uganda, majority of them are constructed in places where waterfalls are. They take away the view that tourists would have enjoyed, but they also take away the waterfalls and in effect affect the entire ecosystem. What are you doing in terms of striking that balance or making it known to government that there should be a balance with our economic development needs and our conservation and biodiversity?
Thank you very much, Raymond. Before I answer your question, I would like to provide information that the National Environment Act, I think the revision was done either 2018, 2019, actually provides a policy on payment for ecosystem services. So what we need, this is to answer to Juliet, to make a comment on Juliet's submission. What we need is the actual implementation of this policy now. The policy itself exists. So I thought I would provide that information. How do we balance development and biodiversity conservation? I think one of the key things that we must do as conservationists is to carry out economic valuation of these biodiversity assets that we have. I'll give an example of the experience we had with Mabira Forest. Yeah? When they wanted to give Mabira Forest for sugarcane growing, there was one gentleman, the late Dr. Muyini, who quickly did an economic valuation of Mabira Forest. And it was based on his report that there was a scientific argument for Mabira Forest in terms of the economic value of the ecosystem services it's providing, that actually stopped government to an extent from giving out Mabira for development completely. So for me, as conservationists, that is one area. We need to do economic valuation for each and every critical ecosystem that we have, such that when there is a proposal for development in any of those ecosystems, we can defend ourselves with economic figures. Because if we cannot justify, then the politicians will take advantage to say, but how many people are being employed in this area? How many, the livelihood of the people, people are dying of poverty. But if we have economic values of what those ecosystems are providing, then we can have a very good ground to argue out our case to protect some of the resources that are very fragile. Talking of Massishon Falls, talking of Bugoma Forest. I mean, we should really, as conservationists, should have already by now prioritized, having information on the economic, value of these resources. That aside, I already pointed out that there is need for us to look beyond the usual areas that we are looking at. Tourism has its own negative impact on biodiversity as well, if not properly managed. There is over-tourism has become a big problem in the world. Uganda hasn't reached there yet, but if we are not careful, and the manner in which, we are concentrating on just having tourism in our protected area estates only, we could easily get into that. And that's why it's important for us to diversify our tourism development. The tourism offering should be diversified to cover so many other areas. And the one beauty we have in tourism as a strategy for development is that you can link it with anything and everything. You can link tourism to agriculture. You have agro-tourism. Somebody is doing their agriculture in a manner that tourists can come and have an experience of that agricultural farm and pay extra, beyond having the experience being paid for. They will buy some of the produce, so we need to historical sites. We have historical sites, monuments that are lying without anything. So we need to reorient ourselves and change our mindsets to look at development in a more sustainable manner. And of course, in tourism, we are trying to do this. But the growth of tourism in Uganda is going to be majorly determined in the next 5 years. Because yes, we had really picked up, getting to 1.8 million arrivals, international arrivals into the country is not a very small number. And if the pandemic had not thrown us back, we would be at a different level, even from our projections this calendar year and next, year. But with this drawback, it gives us an opportunity as well to plan better and prioritize accordingly. So for me, I want to emphasize the point that yes, there are all the other developments that we need, but I believe that the key development that will not have the greatest negative impact on conservation, or actually promote conservation, biodiversity conservation better for this country, is nothing other than the tourism development. Thank you for now.
All right, thank you so much. And you make a really good clarion call for tourism development. And I now want to bring in Hilda with the same question really on the struggle between development and conservation. What's the balance and when should it be struck? And how do we conserve the environment, but also how do we use that environment to develop the country, but also to develop the human resource that live on it?
Thank you, Raymond, for that question. And I would start by saying that we have the answer to biodiversity loss, and that is consumption. One other thing is that we should not always wait for pandemics and disasters to break out for us to act. Because when you look at Africa as a continent, we have to embrace conservation because our population is expected to grow, to double actually, by 2050, and that is about 2.5 billion people will be in Africa, and with almost 70% below the age of 40 years, and that is the youth. And one other thing is that we should change the way we interact with nature. We should change our behavior. The way we interact with nature is very crucial. And we should look at, I should say climate justice, but then let me break it down. We, as Africa, we receive sunlight or sunshine throughout the year, day in, day out. This is a very big opportunity for us. We shouldn't see it as a threat. We should see it as an opportunity. What am I saying? I am saying that with this sunlight throughout the year, we can embrace renewable energy. So we have a chance to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. We can generate solar energy that can even power or supply the whole world as a continent, Africa. But we are not using this. Why should we go back to our natural resources of destroying our waterfalls to get hydropower? Yet we receive sunlight throughout the year. Why would we? We also should look at massive reforestation. Uganda, we are blessed to be called the Pearl of Africa, but then we have to clean this pearl over and over again, or else it will lose shine. We have very fertile soils in Uganda. We are an agricultural country. That means we can support plant growth. We can plant as many trees as we can so that we have a sustainable future, so that we can absorb all these emissions that we produce. The other thing I should look at is our leaders. Our leaders are really letting us down when it's something, when it comes to something to be implemented or done in 10 years from now. They are more than happy. It is not going to impact them for now. But if it comes to something that we have to do right now and right here, they betray us, they don't show up. For example, Bugoma forest is being cut down for sugarcane growing, but where are our leaders on this? Like I said earlier, we should not wait for disasters to break out for us to act. Right now, Bugoma forest destruction has not given us a direct, what should I say, like red light, but then this red light is already there. It's just that we are giving it deaf ears, because this destruction of this forest will lead to even more destruction of other forests and also other natural resources. I should say that our leaders need to, our leaders should take more bold actions or more bold steps into climate action. I should say that the pandemic emergency has shown us that if we need to take quick or urgent action, we can, but then why haven't we for things like biodiversity, for things like climate change? Because a green recovery is possible, but then this depends on the decisions our leaders take. So we need decisive and concrete steps from our leaders. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's a good clarion call, decisive steps from our leaders. And now I want us to get into our concluding remarks because our time is really fast spent. And I want to start with you, Walter. I see that you're very ready to make your concluding remarks. You even unmuted the microphone, so I think you should go first.
Thank you. Yeah, when we look at all our discussion, we can sum it that biodiversity is geopolitical resource that cannot be addressed singly. When we look at, think of it in terms of individuals, we cannot manage. We need to handle it at a landscape level, at a national level, and sometimes at a transboundary level. That is how we can really look and see how we can do some action. So we need to give the responsibility to individuals and the landowners. Example of, speaking of the conservancy, there are already 5 areas that has already shown good example in Uganda. That is Karenga Community Wildlife Area, which is situated in Agago, Kitgum, that area of Karamoja, Karenga, Abim, and the rest is a large area. That community are already getting benefit from wildlife on their land by getting billions of shillings annually from sport hunting and tourism. We have got Aswalolim around Maxon Falls that is already generating funds to the landowners, Ziwa Ranch, and Rorambira. We call upon donors and people who have spirit in supporting community participation in wildlife management to come in and give that support. That is what we are currently working on. And we believe that by that, the increasing demand for degazettement, when you look at the moment, everybody wants protected area to be degazetted. But if we go through this approach of community participation, giving them opportunity, then we may have chance to create more protected area or more chance to have habitat for biodiversity conserve. Otherwise, we need to move down. We need to move down, and dealing with those challenges require reduced practice, destruction of the environment. If we go along that line, we are able to reduce charcoal burning, which we can see trailers and trailers are bringing charcoal to Kampala. This is unstoppable by police, unstoppable by NFA, but if the community themselves take up this responsibility, then something good can be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Walter, for your concluding remarks. I'll now take concluding remarks from Julie.
Thank you, Raymond, and thank you for the whole team for the discussions. What I take away from this in my conclusion is, again, the need for government to come in strongly. In the countries that we've seen that have been able to protect their biodiversity of their countries, we've seen strong enforcement, we've seen strong involvement of the government. So I don't think there's a point where we can say the government has done enough. At one point, the government, development partners, and those who are looking at development policies should come in strongly in terms of implementation. And thank you, Lily, for the clarification on that. Implementation of the policies in place and enforcement of the policies in place. Because otherwise, the community has really no guidance at the local level. And a strong commitment of the government needs to come through in terms of protection of the country's biodiversity. Not now, not for only now, but for the future generation. Secondly, the enhancement of community participation. Again, this goes hand in hand with the government enforcement, helping them to understand, to realize the importance of the biodiversity, to realize that this is a source that needs to be protected for the future, and to realize that they can actually benefit and get out of their state of poverty, if that is the case, in terms of using the biodiversity efficiently. Then research and assessment of the existing ecosystems and the services they provide. I know there's a lot out there that we do not know, as someone has already mentioned, and we need a baseline, we need a monitoring system. Otherwise, we are operating blindly. So if we do not have that baseline, we do not have a monitoring system on what needs to be done, how the infrastructure should come into place, and what role it should play in enhancing the biodiversity as well, then we are operating blindly, as I said. And then I think my biggest conclusion is to avoid where we can the biodiversity, but that needs to have a baseline in place, minimize as much as possible, and if it is very crucial, restore, and if not, offset. But in terms of planning, this needs to be put into our planning systems, both with development partners, government, local authorities. This is how we are going to approach development and eradication of poverty and protection of the biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for those concluding remarks. Now I'll come to Hilda for your concluding remarks, and then we'll go to Lily after that.
Thank you, Raymond. Well, my concluding remarks would be that our health and life depends on nature and wildlife. Therefore, we have to preserve nature. And the rate at which we are destroying nature is unprecedented, especially in Africa, and this is in the name of development. Yes, we need development, but not at the expense of our lives. We need our lives even most. So this development should be sustainable. Like I gave an example earlier of renewable energy. Renewable energy is cheap and it's available. We can have it, so let's have it. And one other thing I would say is that this earth wasn't given to us as a gift by our parents, but rather loaned to us by our grandchildren in the coming generations. Therefore, we need to preserve it with all our lives because our lives depend on it. Our lives depend on the way we communicate or we behave with nature. Therefore, let's embrace biodiversity protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Let's get the concluding remarks from Lily Ajarova.
Thank you very much, Raymond. And again, I would like to say thank you very much to the organizers of this discussion and to the rest of the panelists, and to you, Raymond, for moderating. I'd like to say that sustainable development is possible. And as a country, Uganda, we are in a very good position to get that to happen at the point where we are. In the space where we are sitting right now, it is possible. We have policies good policies that have been made. The biggest challenge is the implementation of those policies. We need to devise strategies of getting the enforcement and the implementation of these policies done. But also to emphasize that, yes, one of my colleagues said there's enough awareness and communication. I'd like to say that there's still strategic communication that we need to make. What exactly are we communicating in terms of biodiversity conservation to the common Ugandan person in the rural areas, even to the politicians, to our leaders? What exactly do we get them to appreciate and understand the value of the ecosystem services, for example? If we do not get to that level, then our politicians will not be able to move with us. They are the leaders who are making decisions in parliament, the policies they are passing and everything else. We need to have a communication strategy on biodiversity conservation that addresses different segments of the population, because not everybody will understand it in the same way. For the common Ugandan person in the rural area who is depending on subsistence agriculture, and if there is a drought, he or she with the whole family has no other alternative to their livelihood. Tell me, if you do not provide alternative to their livelihood, that they will stop cutting down the forest, that they will stop poaching. So there should be, I would recommend that we need to have a communication strategy that addresses the different segments of the population with the different messages that affects the different segments of the population. And finally, it was already said, the coordination between the different players, whether in development, in conservation, among the conservationists themselves, with policy makers. I know that in parliament right now, they have different advocacy groups on climatic change, on tourism and conservation. You know, as conservationists, we need to use those opportunities, because if you have a climatic change committee advocacy in parliament, that is the right group for us to use to advocate for conservation at the policy level. And finally, to restate that biodiversity contributes significantly to the attractiveness and quality of any tourist destination. As someone who is right now in leadership in tourism sector, we have an opportunity to use tourism as a strategy, as a developmental agenda for the benefit of biodiversity conservation. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Lily, for that. And now I'll allow Donas make his final and concluding remarks, and then we can close.
Thank you. So I think that as we go into the electoral period, biodiversity conservation should be one of the litmus tests that we use to determine the kind of leaders that we are going to have getting into these positions of power. And as for my community, I've made it clear to both the local people that when a politician comes and he doesn't tell us how he's going to help us protect the share trees and conserve them, we are not going to give them a single vote. That is very clear for us. And secondly, I think we have also said enough about the role of the private sector, because the private sector breaks or mends, they actually destroys or conserves at the same time. So I think that we need to continuously engage them, but also make them be at the forefront of all this, because it's also within the private sector where innovation is ripe, and where, if offered with the right opportunities, they could actually take lead and set a stage in all these kind of conversations that we are having. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate being part of this conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Donas. Thank you so much, Walter. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you, Hilda. Thank you, Lily, my panelists today. It's been such a great honor having you guys in conversation, and thank you so much to CAS, which has allowed for this conversation to happen as part of the Kampala Geopolitics Office Conference. I should let you know, though, that this is part of a series of conversations, so there is more to come, particularly in this series of conversations over the next 2 weeks. And the next one is on the 18th of November on a Wednesday, where we'll talk about can international city cooperation reshape foreign relations amongst countries. And that's a very interesting conversation that I'll be looking forward to myself. So from me to every one of you, have yourselves a good evening and goodbye.
Thank you.